Let's talk about global gender inequality. The deep-rooted gender discrimination experienced worldwide stems from the remnants of patriarchal systems that have historically granted power and value to males over females. From the moment of conception and throughout their lives, women, girls, and individuals who do not conform to gender norms face constraints imposed by cultural values, social norms, and institutional and individual discrimination. Even in countries where discrimination laws have been abolished, unequal opportunities can persist due to the perpetuation of traditional practices and mindsets. Discrimination and persecution against homosexual, transgender, and intersex individuals are rooted in the same patriarchal values that have oppressed women and girls. Challenges to traditional gender roles and the empowerment of marginalized groups are often met with resistance as they threaten the established power dynamics. Globally, women, girls, and LGBTQIA individuals share similar struggles, facing violence and discrimination solely for being who they are. Equal rights for all are not merely a suggestion, but a mandate under international and domestic laws. Realizing these rights and achieving true equality remains one of the critical challenges of the 21st century. The concepts of sex and gender are often conflated, but there are distinct constructs that are socially and culturally defined. Sex refers to the biological and physiological characteristics that define individuals as male, female, or intersex. These characteristics include chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive organs. While sex is typically assigned at birth based on observable biological traits, it is important to note that individuals can be born with various combinations of these characteristics, leading to the recognition of intersex individuals. In addition, meaning is assigned to hormones, chromosomes, and genitals. Gender, on the other hand, is a social construct that encompasses the roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a society considers appropriate for men and women. Gender is a spectrum, and individuals may identify as male, female, non-binary, or another gender identity that may or may not align with their biological sex. Gender roles and expectations are shaped by societal norms, cultural traditions, and power dynamics, and they can vary across different societies and historical periods. Both sex and gender are socially constructed in the sense that the meanings and significance attached to biological characteristics and gender identities are shaped by social and cultural context. The rigid binary categorization of sex and gender has been challenged by increasing recognition of the diversity of human experiences and identities. It is crucial to understand the distinction between sex and gender as well as their social construction to promote inclusivity, challenge harmful stereotypes, and ensure equal rights and opportunities for individuals across the gender spectrum. Gender inequality and the rigid bifurcation of gender roles are not inherent to human societies. In many hunter-gatherer communities, women and men are considered equals, and gender was not strictly divided into two categories. As societies evolved beyond subsistence and accumulated surplus goods, the control over these resources became a source of power imbalances. The emergence of gender inequality and the rigid division of gender roles can be seen as one of the oldest and most pervasive forms of discrimination. Despite the widespread acceptance of international agreements such as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, as well as the enshrinement of gender equality in many national constitutions and laws, progress has been uneven. While significant advancements were made earlier in the millennium, issues related to sex and gender identity have become increasingly polarized in recent years, leading to a resurgence of cultural conflicts. The rights of women, lesbians, gay individuals, transgender persons, queer individuals, intersex individuals, and non-binary individuals are facing renewed threats, and in some cases regression. This backlash against gender equality and the recognition of diverse gender identities represents a significant challenge in the ongoing fight for equal rights and social justice. Discrimination against women and girls manifests throughout their lifespan, significantly limiting their life chances and opportunities. Here is a short list. 1. Early childhood. Even before birth, gender-based sex selection can deprive girls of the right to life. Girls often face neglect and access to nutrition, health care, and education compared to boys. 2. Education. In many parts of the world, girls face barriers to attending school, receiving lower prioritization for educational opportunities, and encountering gender-based violence and harassment in educational settings. 3. Employment. Women encounter discrimination in hiring, promotion, and equal pay for equal work. They often are concentrated in lower-paying sectors and informal employment with limited social protection. 4. Economic empowerment. Women have limited access to economic resources such as land, property rights, and financial services, hindering their ability to achieve financial independence and economic empowerment. 5. Health. Women's health needs, particularly related to reproductive health, are often neglected and underfunded, leading to higher maternal mortality rates and limited access to family planning services. 6. Political participation. Women are underrepresented in decision-making processes and leadership positions, limiting their ability to influence policies that affect their lives. 7. Gender-based violence. Throughout their lives, women and girls face the threat of various forms of gender-based violence, including domestic violence, sexual assault, harassment, and human trafficking, which can have long-lasting physical, emotional, and economic consequences. These discriminatory practices and barriers rooted in patriarchal norms and gender stereotypes perpetuate a cycle of disempowerment and marginalization, severely limiting the life chances and opportunities available to women and girls. Gender inequality is a pervasive issue that affects human development from the very beginning of life. The situation of women and girls varies widely across the world, with different challenges and concerns. In developed societies, key issues include equal pay, fair opportunities for advancement, representation in political and corporate spheres, and combating sexual violence and harassment. In developing countries, the needs are even greater, with violence against women often more normalized and sometimes legally sanctioned. The United Nations Development Program Human Development Report includes a Gender Inequality Index, GII, in addition to the Human Development Index. The GII incorporates indicators related to reproductive health, empowerment, and labor market participation to measure inequality between genders. There is not a single country with a GII of 0, indicating that gender inequality inhibits development and quality of life everywhere, particularly for women. Countries with lower development levels tend to have higher gender inequality. Women and LGBTQIA+ individuals who belong to minority groups face compounded marginalization due to the intersecting effects of multiple disadvantaged identities. Across the world, women do not have life chances equal to those of men. The World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report reveals persistent gaps between men and women across economic participation, education, health, and political empowerment. The political empowerment gap is especially stark, with no region having closed more than 40% of the gender gap in this domain. Gender discrimination begins at birth in patriarchal societies with son preference, driven by factors like the need for male heirs, expectation of old age support, and the perceived economic benefits of sons. This bias manifests through practices like selective abortion, infanticide, and differential resource allocation favoring sons over daughters. The underlying bias favoring males has far-reaching impacts on the health, well-being, and life opportunities of girls throughout their lives, perpetuating this cycle of gender inequality. Patriarchy, which denotes the system of societal structures and practices that grant power and privilege to men over women, lies at the root of discrimination against both women and LGBTQIA+ individuals. This discriminatory ideology stems from rigid gender norms that uphold male dominance and the subjugation of those who deviate from traditional gender roles and heteronormative expectations. Within patriarchal systems, women are often regulated to subordinate positions, denied equal opportunities in education, employment, and decision-making processes. They face various forms of violence, harassment, and control over their bodies and choices. The discrimination against women is rooted in the patriarchal belief that men are inherently superior and should hold authority over women. Patriarchy also fluids discrimination against LGBTQIA individuals by enforcing strict gender binary norms and heterosexual ideals. Those who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, or non-binary challenge the patriarchal notions of gender and sexuality, which is seen as a threat to the established power structure. LGBTQIA+ individuals often face stigmatization, marginalization, and even criminalization of their identities and relationships. The discrimination against both women and LGBTQIA+ individuals is perpetuated by patriarchal ideologies that seek to maintain traditional gender roles, preserve male privilege, and suppress any challenges to the status quo. Dismantling patriarchal systems and promoting gender equality, inclusivity, and respect for diverse identities and expression is crucial to combat discrimination and ensure equal rights and opportunities for all. Patriarchal institutions and cultural attitudes that discriminate against women also perpetuate discrimination against individuals who challenge gender identities and norms. Narrow definitions of sexual orientation and gender normalcy exclude and marginalize many people. In some countries, merely being true to one's identity can be criminalized. In others, expressing gender or sexuality outside societal boundaries may be regarded as a crime, sin, or illness. The United Nations and international law affirm that countries have an obligation to protect all persons from violence, torture, and cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment, specifically mentioning LGBTQIA individuals. This includes ensuring rights to privacy, free expression, speech, assembly, protection from discrimination, social hostility, and hate crimes, and prosecuting such illegal behaviors. It also encompasses protection from practices like conversion therapy, forced examinations, involuntary sterilization, and unnecessary medical interventions on intersex children. As of 2020, homosexuality remained criminalized in 69 UN member countries, primarily concentrated in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. The criminalization of same-sex relations among men is more common than among women, with penalties ranging from fines and imprisonment to death sentences. Despite being illegal, there are often resistance, as in the United States, to include LGBTQIA people in protections for all. As of 2020, only 11 countries had constitutional protections for LGBTQIA individuals. Conversion therapy, efforts to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity, is also life-threatening, with only 4 countries having federal bans on the practice. Discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity occurs daily throughout Europe, despite being illegal. Hate crimes were on the rise in 2020, as in the United States. Social hostilities are being exacerbated and encouraged by media campaigns in many countries, employing tactics of dehumanization and demonization akin to those used in genocides. Television programs have labeled homosexuals as devil worshippers and falsely accused them of rape and pedophilia, portraying homosexuality as a Western implant. In the United States, anti-LGBTQIA+ politicians and religious leaders have expressed more hostility than the general public. After the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022, there were calls to roll back LGBTQIA+ protections. Child marriage should be considered a human right injustice that disproportionately impacts girls. Forced into marriage at a young age, child brides are stripped of their dreams of education and career attainment. They are among the most disadvantaged and discriminated against women in the world, often bought and sold without their consent. While most countries set the minimum legal age for marriage at 18, exceptions with parental consent are common. However, parental approval does not protect girls from child marriage, as parents are frequently the ones arranging these marriages, sometimes without the girl's knowledge until the last moment. Globally, about 21% of girls are married or in an informal union before the age of 18, with the rate rising to 36% in the least developed countries and 10% married before the age of 15. Child marriage violates the human rights of children, both boys and girls, who are physically and emotionally immature for marriage and sexual relations. Poverty is a significant driver of child marriage, as families may view marrying off their daughters as a way to secure their financial future or protection during crises. In some cultures, girls are deliberately circumcised at a young age to facilitate earlier marriage, as younger brides are seen as more desirable due to their presumed virginity. Child marriage is more prevalent in poor and rural communities, refugee camps, and conflict-affected areas, where it is sometimes viewed as a form of protection for girls. However, it robs them of their childhood, education, and future prospects, perpetuating a cycle of poverty and disempowerment. Addressing child marriage requires a multifaceted approach, including economic development, urbanization, awareness campaigns, and social welfare programs to alleviate the financial burden on families. It is also crucial to challenge the underlying cultural norms and attitudes that devalue women and girls. Ultimately, achieving gender equality and protecting the rights of women and girls within the family unit is essential. This includes recognizing marital rape, preventing domestic violence, promoting shared household responsibilities, ensuring women's autonomy in marriage decisions, and granting them control over household finances and resources. Access to education is a transformative force, yet girls' access to education is often violently opposed by groups that view it as a threat to traditional values and social norms. The Pakistani activist Malala Yousafzai, who survived an assassination attempt at age 17 for campaigning for girls' education, highlights the extreme risks some face in pursuing this basic right. Armed conflicts and general violence against girls further limit their educational opportunities, with many forced to stay home or subjected to child marriage as a perceived form of protection. Despite these attacks, girls continue to pursue education when given the chance, as it is a right guaranteed by nearly every international human rights treaty and national constitution. Refugees, asylum seekers, and stateless persons maintain their right to education. However, not every girl has equal access to education commensurate with their ambition or ability. Literacy is a fundamental need that contributes to better employment prospects, improved health, and increased community engagement and political participation. It has the power to improve one's life and that of their family members. In many countries, particularly those with low development and literacy rates, women are disadvantaged in comparison with men. Contemporary progress in school enrollment is one of the success stories of the Millennium Development Goals. The duration and quality of students' education significantly impact nearly every aspect of their lives, including employment, income, health, and the quality of life for their children. In many regions, young women are achieving higher academic performance, attending college at higher rates, and graduating higher rates than their male counterparts. However, disparities in educational achievement persist across different regions and contexts. Gender inequality persists in economic participation and opportunity despite increasing levels of education for women. The disadvantages girls face in education follow them into the workforce and political realm, where equal education does not translate into equal employment opportunities or pay. Earning gaps between men and women vary across countries, industries, and occupations, but are generally larger in poorer countries. A multitude of factors contribute to these gaps, including the fields women study, occupational segregation into lower-paying sectors, career interruptions for childcare and family responsibilities, gender biases, and the disproportionate burden of unpaid domestic and caregiving work shouldered by women. The motherhood penalty results in lower wages for mothers, while fathers receive a wage premium. Across regions, gender inequality and labor force participation and earnings is a major driver of women's overall disadvantage in realizing their life chances and the feminization of poverty. Pay gaps are often wider at the upper end of the income distribution in high-income countries and at the lower end in lower-income nations. Even after controlling for factors like education and experience, a significant portion of the pay gap remains unexplained, pointing to persisting discrimination. Occupational segregation concentrates women in lower-paying clerical, support, care, and domestic roles, while men dominate higher-paying managerial, technical, and industrial positions. Gender stereotypes, sexual harassment, and male-dominated fields, availability of childcare, and family-friendly policies, and gendered education trajectories are all contribute to this segregation. Women's disproportionate responsibility for unpaid domestic and caregiving work, termed the second shift, further inhibits their earning potential and leisure time while adding tremendous economic value through their invisible labor. Establishing gender equality and economic power requires a significant and sustained effort to overcome deep-rooted cultural attitudes and structural constraints. Women's economic empowerment is critical not only for improving their individual life chances, but also for driving progress across entire societies. Women constitute a substantial portion of the agricultural labor force, yet the persistent gender gap in access to resources and opportunities in this sector limits both women's potential and overall economic development. Similar disparities exist for women in wage employment and entrepreneurship. Research shows that increasing women's participation in the workforce, whether as employees or business owners, accelerates economic growth for societies as a whole. Additionally, the greater the share of household income controlled by women, the more resources are invested in children's well-being, benefiting the future of communities. To promote women's comprehensive economic empowerment, interventions must holistically address the distinct needs of women as agriculture workers, wage earners, entrepreneurs, and drivers of household economies. Overcoming entrenched gender inequalities in economic spheres is pivotal for unlocking the full potential of women and catalyzing broader societal progress. The international community has established a framework of laws and agreements aimed at protecting the rights of women, girls, and LGBTQIA+ individuals. Key instruments include the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and various United Nations resolutions affirming the rights of LGBTQIA+ persons. However, the incorporation of these international standards into national legislation and their enforcement remains uneven across countries. While many nations have ratified CEDAW and enshrined gender equality in their constitutions, discriminatory laws and practices persist, particularly in the areas like family law, poverty rights, and protection from gender-based violence. For LGBTQIA+ individuals, the legal landscape is even more precarious. As of 2020, homosexuality remained criminalized in 69 UN member states, primarily concentrated in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, with penalties ranging from fines and imprisonment to the death penalty in some cases. Even in countries where same-sex relationships are legal, LGBTQIA+ individuals often lack comprehensive legal protections against discrimination in such areas as employment, housing, and access to services. Beyond legal frameworks, social stigma, cultural norms, and lack of political will continue to hinder the full realization of rights for marginalized gender and sexual identities. Hate crimes, conversion therapy practices, and discrimination in healthcare and education settings remain widespread challenges. Effective implementation of international human rights standards requires a multifaceted approach, including reforming national laws, enhancing enforcement mechanisms, challenging discriminatory actions through public awareness campaigns, and empowering civil society organizations to advocate for change. Sustained commitment from governments, international bodies, and civil society is crucial to translate the aspiration of these agreements into tangible progress and protection for all individuals, regardless of their gender and sexual orientation. Reforms to minimum wage policies and laws can help raise incomes among the lowest paid workers across genders. The International Labor Organization, ILO, has passed several minimum wage fixing machinery conventions in 1928, 1951, and 1970, encouraging governments to implement minimum wage laws to protect disadvantaged workers groups from unduly low rate wages. These conventions stipulate that minimum wages should be dynamic, periodically adjusted to economic conditions, and sufficient to satisfy reasonable human needs, and improving living standards for all workers. However, in practice, many countries fall short of meeting the ILO standards aimed at combating poverty, satisfying human needs, and reducing inequality through minimum wage legislation. There is significant variation in how countries define and calculate the minimum wage, including whether benefits in kind, overtime pay, and tips are factored in. Some nations establish regular reviews or automatic increases, while others do not adjust wages in line with economic growth or inflation. Importantly, the 1970 ILO Convention mandates considering not just individual worker needs, but also family needs when setting minimum wages. A common approach is pegging the minimum wage to the mean wage level. However, pay gaps between men and women persist in minimum wage jobs, especially in systems that allow different wage floors across occupations or sectors. This highlights the issue of gender-based occupational segregation, where jobs dominated by women are often valued and compensated less than male-dominant roles of equivalent skill and working conditions, violating the principle of equal pay for work of equal value. Achieving gender equality and economic empowerment requires addressing the unequal access to critical resources that women face across many countries. Relieving time constraints, ensuring access to financial resources, providing meaningful education and training opportunities, and securing rights to land, tenure, or ownership all have the potential to increase women's income-generating capacities. Overcoming restrictive cultural norms that require women to have male guardians in public spheres, prohibit socialization between genders, and limit women's participation in legal matters is also essential. Effective interventions must be tailored to the specific needs of different groups of women based on factors such as income levels, age, and rural or urban contexts. Access to capital is crucial for women entrepreneurs, but the impacts vary across the size of their enterprise. Cultural practices like the kin tax, where women are pressured to share resources with extended family, can undermine business growth, especially when cash loans are visible. Providing privacy through mobile money transfers or in-kind capital can help women retain control over their finances. Saving accounts have also been shown to improve women's economic performance by fostering a sense of ownership. Skills and business training programs often face high attrition rates among women due to time and financial constraints. Designing these programs with women's availability in mind, offering subsidies during training periods, and providing longer-term, more effective courses can increase participation and completion rates. Equitable land rights are crucial for strengthening women's roles in agriculture. However, in many developing countries, land is primarily controlled by men and male-headed kinship groups. Even when women's land rights are legally protected, enforcement is often weak, and women may be unaware of their entitlements. Large-scale land acquisitions by corporations and governments have further exacerbated competition for land, disproportionately impacting small landholders, especially women. Implementing existing laws, pressuring governments to end discriminatory practices, correcting discriminatory laws, and ensuring women's equal access to resources such as land, credit, tools, organizational memberships, and marketing are crucial steps. The United Nations must strengthen monitoring of countries' commitments under international treaties, research international constraints on women's rights, and maintain a database of land ownership disaggregated by gender. Infrastructure investments designed with women's constraints in mind, coupled with gender-responsive policies, can promote development across farming, wage work, and entrepreneurship. Providing access to energy, technology, and transportation opens up opportunities for women, particularly those with heavy household responsibilities. Family-friendly work policies such as quality and affordable childcare, significant paid family leave that can be shared by spouses, quality health care, and insurance and job protection during family leave are necessary for achieving gender equality in the workforce. These policies help counter the motherhood penalty and ensure that women are not disadvantaged for bearing children. Policies details matter, such as guaranteeing most or all of workers' usual pay during leave to encourage participation from both parents and protecting job seniority without penalties. Courts have played a pivotal role in protecting the rights of individuals facing discrimination based on gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Through landmark decisions and legal interpretations, courts have served as a critical avenue for advancing equality and challenging discriminatory laws, policies, and practices. In many countries, court rulings have been instrumental in striking down laws that criminalize same-sex relationships or discriminate against LGBTQIA+ individuals in areas such as marriage, abortion, and access to services. Courts have intervened to protect the rights of transgender individuals, addressing issues like legal gender recognition, access to gender-affirming healthcare, and protection from discrimination in employment and public accommodations. Similarly, courts have been crucial in upholding and interpreting laws and regulations aimed at preventing discrimination against women in the workplace, education, and other spheres. Decisions on equal pay, sexual harassment, pregnancy discrimination, and gender-based violence have helped reinforce legal protections and set important precedents. However, the role of courts in advancing equality has not been uniform across different jurisdictions. In some countries, conservative or traditionalist interpretations of laws and constitutions have perpetuated discrimination or limited the scope of legal protections for marginalized groups. Furthermore, court decisions alone are not sufficient to dismantle deeply entrenched societal attitudes and systemic forms of discrimination. Effective implementation and enforcement of court rulings, as well as complementary efforts in such areas as education, policy reform, and cultural change, are essential for translating legal victories into tangible progress. Nonetheless, courts remain a critical avenue for individuals and advocacy groups to challenge discriminatory practices and push for the recognition and protection of fundamental rights. Robust judicial systems that uphold principles of equality, non-discrimination, and human rights are crucial in the ongoing fight against gender-based discrimination and the marginalization of LGBTQIA+ individuals. The number of women in government is directly related to the advancement of women's welfare across all realms of life. Increasing women's representation in political processes and decision-making bodies has proven beneficial in part because women tend to work across party lines even in adversarial environments. Greater participation of women in legislative bodies translate into more votes for legislation and policies that support issues perceived as women's issues and prevents women from being marginalized into token roles. With more female legislators, policies aimed at women's empowerment are more likely to be enacted, and women can exert greater influence over policymaking and legislation in general. Both the progress and impediments to women's empowerment are shaped by country-specific factors as well as forces of globalization. As gender equity has become a more prominent indicator of a country's development on the global stage, political participation has emerged as an important measure. Regional and international declarations such as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women have reinforced the importance of increasing female participation and stipulated that countries must take measures to end discrimination against women in political and public life. However, cultural factors are not the only obstacles. Financial and personal considerations can also hinder women's political engagement. Gender quotas can help overcome cultural and religious barriers to achieve better representation of women in policymaking roles. Ensuring representation in politics is one of the most crucial categories for improving the situation of women, whether in developed or developing societies. While securing full voting rights for women is the first step, getting women elected to office and ensuring their voices are equal to men's is the critical next challenge. Training programs run by political parties, academic institutions, and civil society organizations that mentor and prepare women to run for elective office are essential for promoting their participation. Incentive structures like awarding state funding to parties based on the number of female candidates they elect can also encourage greater representation. Voluntary party quotas and legislated reserved seats for women are two common strategies employed. Reserved seats guarantee a specific portion of seats for women, which can be particularly effective if women use this initial platform to build name recognition and later transition to running for non-reserved seats, allowing new women to fill the vacated reserved seats. However, quotas and electoral systems alone are not sufficient. More extensive efforts are needed to reach all groups of women. So far, gender quotas have disproportionately benefited majority women over minority women, with minority representation often being claimed by dominant group women or minority men when it increases. Strategies to ensure direct representation of minority ethnic women are critical to prevent their marginalization and the intersection of gender and ethnic identity politics. Young women are also underrepresented compared to both older women and younger men, necessitating targeted efforts. Gendered electoral financing by governments or organizations can help address the financial roadblocks that prevent many women from running for office. Training, education, and electoral system structures that employ proportional representation systems where multiple seats are allocated based on vote shares rather than winner-take-all districts can also promote women's representation. Ultimately, a multi-pronged approach that combines quotas, financing, training, and systemic reforms is needed to overcome the multifaceted obstacles hindering women's equal and effective political participation globally. Reducing gender and sexuality-based hate crimes and violence requires a comprehensive approach that addresses the root causes of discrimination and promotes a culture of inclusivity and respect. Here are some key strategies. 1. Strengthening legal frameworks. Governments should enact and enforce robust laws that criminalize hate crimes motivated by gender or sexual orientation and provide adequate protection and support for victims. Clear legal consequences can deter potential perpetrators and signal societal tolerance for such acts. 2. Improving data collection and reporting. Accurate data on the prevalence and nature of gender and sexuality-based hate crimes is crucial for informing effective policies and interventions. Encouraging victims to report incidents and encouraging proper documentation can shed light on the scope of this problem. 3. Promoting education and awareness. Widespread educational campaigns can challenge harmful stereotypes, combat misinformation, and foster understanding and acceptance of diverse gender identities and sexual orientations from an early age. Inclusive curricula and training for educators, law enforcement, and service providers are essential. 4. Empowering community organizations. Supporting and collaborating with local organizations that represent and advocate for LGBTQIA+ individuals and gender minorities can help amplify their voices, provide safe spaces, and facilitate community-led initiatives to prevent and respond to hate crimes. 5. Addressing intersectional challenges. Recognizing and compounding marginalization faced by individuals with multiple minority identities, for example, LGBTQIA+ individuals of color, transgender refugees, and others, and tailoring interventions to their specific needs is crucial. 6. Encouraging allyship and bystander intervention. Fostering a culture of allyship and providing training on safe and effective bystander intervention can create a supportive network and discourage instances of hate and violence. 7. Promoting positive representations. Increasing positive and diverse representations of LGBTQIA+ individuals and gender minorities in media, pop culture, and public discourse can challenge stereotypes and normalize acceptance. Sustained efforts across multiple fronts involving collaboration between governments, civil society, educational institutions, and communities are necessary to combat gender and sexuality-based hate crimes and create a more inclusive and safe society for all. In much of the world, gender-based violence remains a hidden and silenced issue, with only the most egregious cases coming to light. Some societies have only recently acknowledged domestic violence as a criminal offense rather than a private family matter. Honor killings, where women are murdered for violating perceived family honor, remain a tragic reality in certain contexts. According to the UN, 35% of women globally have experienced physical or sexual violence or both, with rates as high as 70% in some countries. Violence against women is widespread across private and public spheres, encompassing physical, sexual, psychological, and emotional forms. It manifests through practices like forced and child marriage, sex trafficking, honor crimes, forced pregnancy, intimate partner violence, violence by strangers, and violence in conflict situations. Marginalized groups including adolescent girls, ethnic and racial minorities, transgender women, and women with disabilities face heightened risk of experiencing violence. The World Health Organization has identified risk factors at societal, community, interpersonal, and individual levels that contribute to this pervasive issue. Societal factors include institutional discrimination against women's rights, weak legal protections and enforcement, low education and employment opportunities. Community-level risk encompasses gender norms that privilege males, high poverty and crime rates, and availability of drugs, alcohol, and weapons. Interpersonal dynamics like inequality in relationships, men's, multiple sexual partners, and substance abuse also play a role. At the individual level, childhood exposure to family violence, mental health disorders, and attitudes that condone or justify violence increase the likelihood of perpetuating or experiencing gender-based violence. Addressing this multifaceted and deeply entrenched form of gender inequality requires a comprehensive approach that tackles the underlying societal, cultural, and structural factors that enable and perpetuate violence against women across diverse contexts. The #MeToo movement against sexual harassment and assault gained unprecedented global momentum when activist Tarana Burke's decade-old grassroots campaign found its rallying cry on social media. In 2017, actress Alyssa Milano shared a viral tweet asking victims of sexual misconduct to respond with "Me Too," sparking an avalanche of testimonies from women and men across the world. Within a month, the Me Too hashtag had been retweeted over 2.3 million times in various languages from 85 different countries. What began as raising awareness about the severity of sexual violence against minority women evolved into reckoning with the pervasiveness of sexual harassment and assault, cutting across gender, racial, and socioeconomic lines. The long discussed Me Too brought widespread public attention not only to the most egregious acts of sexual violence, but also to the everyday indignities, innuendos, and objectification that normalized a degradation of women. Victims found strength in numbers to share their experiences and demand accountability from perpetuators across industries and power structures. Civil society groups capitalized on this momentum, increasing political participation by women and amplifying calls for systemic changes to address gender-based violence and discrimination. The hope is that by keeping these issues in the headlines, encouraging male allyship, and intensifying pressure on leaders and institutions, the Me Too movement will have lasting impacts even after the hashtag fades from social media trends. Public perception has already begun to shift, with more people recognizing the commonality of unreported sexual misconduct over false allegations. Ultimately, hashtag Me Too represents a pivotal moment in the global fight against gender inequality, harnessing the power of collective voices to challenge deep-rooted patriarchal norms, cultures of impunity, and the normalization of sexual violence across societies. International pressure can play a pivotal role in fostering positive change regarding gender inequality. Civil society groups in countries with long legal frameworks can advocate for their governments to use incentives and sanctions to address women's rights abuses and other nations as human rights violations. This external pressure can lead to the strengthening and enforcement of laws protecting women's rights. Despite the existence of laws in 122 countries, many violations go unreported. Enhancing the enforcement of liability laws against companies in harassment cases is crucial. This approach can prompt corporations to take harassment seriously, ensuring that incidents are addressed transparently. It can also lead to the prosecution of perpetrators and compensation for victims without fear of retaliation. Addressing harassment is not only a legal obligation, but also a financial imperative for corporations, as harassment claims can be costly. Public awareness and accountability, as seen with the hashtag Me Too movement, are powerful tools in combating gender inequality. Publicly shaming and prosecuting or firing individual perpetrators, especially those with positions of power, can serve as a deterrent. This visibility can alert potential perpetrators and their workplaces to the serious consequences of such behavior, promoting a culture of respect and accountability.